She was lying in a hospital bed, bleeding, broken, barely able to breathe, when the doctor who was supposed to save her started laughing. Not a single word of comfort, not one moment of care, just pure hatred. He mocked her for being black, called her an animal, said he wouldn't waste anesthesia on her kind. And as she drifted toward unconsciousness, he cut into her body, fully awake. But the joke didn't end with her pain. Because this woman, she wasn't just anybody. And the moment he found out who her husband was, everything changed. Now the hospital is panicking, the doctor is scrambling, and her husband is about to tear their world apart without raising his voice. What happens next doesn't just flip the power. It rewrites the meaning of justice. The pre-op room hummed with fluorescent lights and beeping monitors. Grace Carter drifted between consciousness and shadow, her body heavy with pain. Through the fog she heard voices, sharp, dismissive tones that cut deeper than her injuries. "Don't waste the good stuff on her," Dr. Pierce barked, checking the IV line with irritation. "Basic protocol is fine. Let's get this over with." Grace's eyes fluttered. The ceiling tiles blurred above her. Someone touched her hand, gentle, steady. Nurse Evelyn Brooks stood like a shield beside the bed, her clipboard clutched tight. "Standard pain management protocol applies to all surgical patients, doctor," Evelyn said firmly. Her voice carried decades of experience. "I'm paging anesthesia now." "This isn't some fancy private hospital," Pierce sneered. "Resources are limited." "Then I'll page Dr. Matthews, too." Evelyn's fingers moved quickly over the pager. As attending surgeon on call, he should be aware of all emergency procedures. Pierce's face tightened. "That's unnecessary." "It's protocol," Evelyn replied, her calm masking steel. Grace felt the room spinning. Words floated past her like leaves in a stream. BP dropping. Prep for immediate surgery. "Where's that anesthesiologist?" Dr. Matthews arrived first, his white coat wrinkled from sleep. The anesthesiologist followed moments later. With witnesses present, Pierce's demeanor shifted, still cold, but following proper procedures. "Beginning general anesthesia," the anesthesiologist announced. Grace felt the medicine enter her veins. The last thing she saw was Evelyn's face, watchful and determined. The operating room gleamed under harsh lights. Metal instruments clinked against steel trays. Pierce worked with technical skill but zero warmth, treating Grace's body like an inconvenient puzzle to solve. Each order came with a bite of impatience. "Retractor. More suction here. Closer up. Let's not waste more time." Evelyn documented everything, her pen scratching quietly in the corner. 4 hours passed before Pierce announced, "Bleeding's controlled. She'll live." The recovery team moved Grace to ICU. Monitors beeped steadily. Morning light began creeping through the windows as Evelyn finished her detailed notes. She pulled Grace's chart to fill in emergency contacts. Her eyes landed on the name, and her breath caught. Next of kin, Senator Daniel Carter. The clipboard trembled slightly in her hands. Evelyn walked to the nurse's station, picked up the phone, and dialed with deliberate care. "Senator Carter's office. How may I direct your call?" "This is Nurse Brooks from City Memorial Hospital." Evelyn kept her voice level. "I need to speak with the senator regarding his wife. It's urgent." Moments later, a deep voice answered. "This is Daniel Carter. Senator, your wife Grace was in a car accident. She's just out of surgery and is stable. She needs you here. I'm on my way." His voice was tight with concern. As Evelyn hung up, she heard quick footsteps. Dr. Pierce rushed to the desk, his surgical cap still on. "Did you say Senator Carter?" His face had lost its arrogant shine. "That patient, she's a senator's wife?" "Yes." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "What exactly did you tell him?" "That his wife is out of surgery and stable." Pierce ran a hand through his hair. "I should call him myself, explain the procedure, make sure he understands everything was done properly. I'm sure the senator will have questions when he arrives." Evelyn's tone gave nothing away. More footsteps echoed down the hall. The hospital administrator, Linda Morrison, appeared in a perfectly pressed suit despite the early hour. She pulled Pierce aside, speaking in urgent whispers. "We need to control the narrative," Morrison murmured. "Document everything carefully. No irregularities." Pierce stared at his hands, still wearing blue surgical gloves stained with Grace's blood. The swagger had drained from his shoulders. His eyes darted between Morrison's forced smile and Evelyn's quiet presence at the desk. The morning sun streamed through the windows now, painting stark shadows on the ICU floor. In her bed, Grace slept on, unaware of the panic her name had caused. Evelyn sat down at her station, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and continued writing. Every detail, every word, every moment of truth. The fluorescent lights of Mount Mercy Hospital's ICU waiting area buzzed overhead. As Senator Daniel Carter strode through the automatic doors, his normally pristine suit wrinkled and his raincoat still dripping. His face showed the strain of the late-night call, but his eyes remained sharp and focused, scanning the space with the practiced assessment of a man used to reading rooms. Nurse Evelyn Brooks approached him quietly, her clipboard tucked close. "Senator Carter," she said in a low voice, "I'm Nurse Brooks. I've been with your wife since she arrived." Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly at her steady presence. "How is she?" "She's stable now," Evelyn said, leading him toward the ICU windows. She kept her voice measured as she laid out the timeline, the crash, the emergency room, the surgery. But something in her careful word choice made Daniel's neck tense. "There's more," he said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. "Staff are being instructed to keep certain details minimal," she murmured. "But everything that happened is documented." Through the ICU window, Daniel caught his first glimpse of Grace. The sight hit him like a physical blow. His vibrant, loving wife now still and pale, surrounded by beeping monitors and threading tubes. His knees threatened to give way, but years of public service had taught him how to stay upright even when shaken. He entered the room slowly and took Grace's limp hand in his. The wedding ring he'd placed there 23 years ago caught the dim light. His thumb traced gentle circles on her skin, avoiding the IV line. "Mr. Senator." The voice was honey-smooth and professional. Hospital Administrator Marianne Holt appeared in the doorway, her tailored suit pristine despite the early hour. "I came as soon as I heard. You should know your wife received our absolute best care. Dr. Pierce is one of our most celebrated surgeons, a true hero tonight." Daniel noticed how she positioned herself between him and the door, how her smile never quite reached her eyes. "I appreciate that, Ms. Holt. I'd like copies of all medical orders, medication records, and a list of every staff member involved in my wife's care." The administrator's practiced warmth flickered. "Of course, though perhaps we should wait for a more appropriate time. These first hours of recovery are so delicate, we wouldn't want anything to interfere with her healing process." "Are you suggesting that having access to my wife's medical records would harm her recovery?" Daniel's voice remained perfectly level. "Not at all," Holt said smoothly. "I simply mean that transparency requires proper channels. I'll arrange a meeting later today to address any concerns." Daniel caught movement in the hallway, Dr. Pierce hovering at the nurse's station, his earlier swagger replaced by careful distance and darting glances. The doctor's entire demeanor had shifted to something approaching reverence, but his eyes couldn't quite meet Daniel's. The senator had seen enough evasion in Washington to recognize a cover-up forming, but he hadn't spent decades in public service by letting anger override strategy. He turned to Nurse Brooks, who stood quietly by the monitors. "Nurse Brooks, would you mind writing down everything you remember about tonight? Details get fuzzy with time, and I want to make sure we have an accurate record of my wife's care." Evelyn's clipboard tightened against her chest. "Of course, Senator." The administrator's smile thinned. "That won't be necessary. Our electronic records are quite thorough." "Then there should be no problem comparing notes," Daniel said mildly, but his eyes held steel. Left alone with Grace, Daniel bowed his head over their clasped hands. His prayer was barely a whisper in the machine-filled quiet. "Lord, give me the strength to seek truth with dignity, and let no one erase what happened here tonight." He studied Grace's face, marked now with bruises, but still beautiful, still the same face that had captured his heart decades ago with its warmth and quiet strength. Whatever had happened in this hospital, and he could feel the weight of unspoken wrongs in every deflection, he would uncover it, not with rage or threats, but with the same patient resolve that had guided their lives together. Through the glass, he could see Holt speaking urgently into her phone, while Dr. Pierce pretended to study charts. Nurse Brooks stood at her station, already writing. The night shift was ending, but Daniel Carter's vigil, and his quest for answers, was just beginning. The morning sun filtered weakly through the ICU window, casting long shadows across Grace's bed. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly. Everything hurt. The beeping monitors seemed far away, like echoes from another room. When a white coat passed by her doorway, she flinched, her heart rate spiking on the monitor. Daniel squeezed her hand. "I'm right here, sweetheart." At the nurse's station, Evelyn was speaking quietly into a phone. "Yes, Reverend Collins. She could use your presence right now." She hung up and checked her watch, jotting another note in her private log before the day shift arrived. 10 minutes later, Reverend Collins appeared. He was a tall man with kind eyes and grey at his temples. He pulled up a chair beside Grace's bed, his movements gentle and unhurried. "May I pray with you?" he asked softly. Grace managed a small nod. The chaplain's measured voice filled the room with warmth as he asked for comfort, strength, and healing. When he finished, he simply sat there, offering the gift of patient silence. Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks as fragments of the night came back. They laughed," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed earlier. "The doctor, she squeezed her eyes shut, said I belonged at a vet's office, like I wasn't even human." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his touch remained gentle on her hand. "You're safe now, and we believe you." "I was so scared," Grace continued. "On that table I could still hear them. Couldn't move, but I heard—" Her voice broke. "Felt like I was nothing to them, just a body they had to deal with." Evelyn stepped forward, her clipboard hugged to her chest. "I want you to know I wrote everything down. Times, orders, every word he said." She looked at Daniel. "Dr. Pierce tried to rush sedation, wanted to minimize pain medication, said it would be a waste. I had to call the anesthesiologist myself and cite proper protocol." Daniel nodded slowly, his senator's training helping him maintain composure, despite the anger burning in his chest. "Grace," he said softly, "what do you want to do? Not what they expect, not what's easiest for the hospital. What do you need?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, gathering her strength. When she spoke, her voice was weak but clear. "I want the truth to come out. All of it." She squeezed Daniel's hand. "I don't want special treatment because of who you are. I want—" She took a shaky breath. "I want them to face what they did, and I want to make sure they can't do this to anybody else, especially people who don't have—" She gestured weakly at Daniel. "Who don't have a senator to fight for them." Reverend Collins leaned forward. "That's a righteous goal, Mrs. Carter. Standing up not just for yourself, but for others." Meanwhile, 5 floors above in her polished office, Marianne Holt was already orchestrating damage control. She sat at her desk, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, speaking in clipped tones to the risk management team. "I want Grace Carter's chart restricted immediately," she ordered. "Password protected, limited access only." She drummed her French manicured nails on her desk. "All staff inquiries about the case route through administration. No exceptions." The risk manager nodded. "What about the nurses' notes from overnight?" "Those should have been entered into the system already. Lock them down too." Marianne's smile was tight. "We need to manage this situation carefully." Back in the ICU, Grace had drifted into an uneasy sleep. Daniel watched her face, noting every bruise, every line of pain. Evelyn checked the IV drip, her movements efficient but gentle. "Senator," she said quietly, "they're already moving to control the narrative. Restrict access to records." Daniel looked up at her. "But you have your notes." Evelyn patted her clipboard. "Every detail. And I'm not letting them disappear." Through the window, the morning sun grew stronger, but its warmth couldn't reach the wall of silence the hospital was carefully building between the Carters and the truth of what had happened in those dark hours before dawn. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the glass conference room where Daniel Carter sat, his posture steady despite exhaustion. Across the polished table, Marianne Holt smoothed her blazer and offered what looked like a practiced, sympathetic smile. "Senator Carter, first let me say how deeply sorry we are about Mrs. Carter's accident," she began, her voice honey-sweet. "These situations are always stressful for everyone involved." The hospital attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, nodded along as he arranged papers before him. Daniel kept his hands folded calmly on the table. "I appreciate that, Ms. Holt. I'd like to request the full incident report from last night, along with complete medication logs." Of course, Holt replied, though her smile tightened slightly. Though I should mention there seems to have been some miscommunication during the intake process. Dr. Pierce can be very direct in crisis situations. His focus is always on saving lives. I understand directness, Daniel said quietly. What happened to my wife went far beyond that. The attorney cleared his throat. Senator, we should be careful about making assumptions without reviewing all the facts. These situations are complex. Then let's review those facts, Daniel responded. I'm also requesting a preservation hold on any security footage and all records related to Grace's care. The attorney's pen stopped moving. That will take some time to process. We need to follow proper channels. The door opened, and Dr. Pierce walked in. His white coat pristine and his manner suddenly gentle, nothing like the man Grace had described. Senator Carter, Pierce said, extending his hand. Daniel stood but didn't take it. Pierce lowered his arm slowly. I wanted to personally express my regret if anything came across wrong during your wife's emergency care. It was a challenging situation. Daniel noted the careful wording. If anything came across wrong, dodging real responsibility. Doctor, my wife remembers quite clearly how things came across. Later that afternoon, Daniel walked alongside Grace's wheelchair as an orderly pushed her toward radiology for follow-up scans. She was pale, her hands gripping the armrests. Suddenly, Pierce's voice carried from around the corner. Grace's whole body tensed, her breathing turning rapid and shallow. Her fingers trembled against the wheelchair's metal frame. Take us another way, Daniel told the orderly firmly, watching his wife's reaction with rising concern. This wasn't just physical recovery they were dealing with. The emotional trauma was just as real. After Grace was safely back, in her room, Nurse Evelyn pulled Daniel aside in the hallway. Her voice was low but clear. Senator, there were other staff in that OR who looked troubled by what happened. The scrub nurse, Kelly, and Dr. Watson from anesthesia. They saw everything. They might be willing to speak up if asked officially. Daniel nodded, pulling out his phone. He had already started making calls, first to the state patient advocate line for guidance on preserving evidence, then to a trusted contact about initiating a medical board complaint. As evening settled over the hospital, Daniel walked purposefully to Marianne Holt's office, a sealed envelope in his hand. She looked up from her desk, her smile faltering when she saw his expression. This is a formal written request for preservation of all records, footage and documentation related to my wife's care, he said, placing the envelope on her desk. The hospital now has an official obligation to protect this evidence. Holt's fingers tensed around her pen. Senator, I really think we could handle this more discreetly. Ms. Holt, discretion is what allows these situations to keep happening. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. My wife deserves better. Every patient deserves better. He turned and walked out, leaving the preservation demand on her desk, the first official move in bringing the truth to light. The morning sun filtered through the ICU windows, casting long shadows across Grace's room. She'd managed brief periods of sleep between vital checks and medication doses, while Daniel maintained his vigil in the worn visitor's chair, his suit jacket draped over the armrest. Evelyn walked into the unit for her day shift, her practical shoes quiet on the polished floor. The usual morning bustle felt different, tenser, like a rubber band pulled too tight. As she checked her assignments, Martha, a fellow nurse of 20 years, caught her eye and gestured toward the break room. Got a minute? Martha's voice was barely above a whisper. Inside the empty break room, Martha closed the door. You need to know something about Pierce. This isn't the first time. Evelyn's hands stilled on her coffee cup. What do you mean? There have been other complaints. African American, patients, elderly Hispanic folks, always people he thought wouldn't fight back. Martha glanced at the door. But they vanish. Admin calls them internally handled, and everything goes quiet. Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. How many? I don't know exactly, but enough that some of us started noticing the pattern. During a quiet moment between rounds, Evelyn sat at the nurse's station computer and accessed the incident reporting system. Her fingers moved carefully across the keyboard, searching back through previous quarters. There they were, multiple entries connected to Pierce's name, most of them heavily redacted. Just enough detail remained to show similar complaints. Dismissive treatment, inappropriate comments, delayed pain medication. She printed what she could. Bare-bones summaries that painted an ugly picture. When Daniel stepped out to take a phone call, she showed him the pages. "This wasn't just one bad night," she said quietly. Daniel studied the documents, his expression growing grave. They protected him. He brings in donations, performs cutting-edge surgeries. The hospital values his reputation more than... Evelyn trailed off, but Daniel nodded, understanding. Around 2 o'clock, voices drifted down the hallway, warm, familiar voices. Grace's church group had arrived, led by Sister Mary from the prayer circle. They carried covered dishes and handmade cards. Behind them came Sarah and Helen from the Veterans' Wives Support Group, where Grace had volunteered for years. "We're here, honey," Sister Mary said, taking Grace's hand. "You just rest and let us do the fussing." The room filled with gentle energy as the women arranged flowers, set up containers of homemade soup, and simply sat in supportive silence. Grace's color seemed better with them there, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I want to tell you what happened," Grace said softly. The room stilled, not for pity, but because it matters. She spoke slowly, her voice steady despite the pain medication. "He laughed while I was hurting, made jokes about animals, treated me like I wasn't human, wasn't worth basic kindness." She squeezed Daniel's hand. "And I keep thinking about all the other patients who might have faced the same thing but without someone to stand up for them." Sarah, whose husband had lost a leg in Desert Storm, leaned forward. "What do you need from us, Grace?" "I don't want revenge," Grace said. "I want change. I want every patient to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or what they look like." She looked at Daniel. "Can we make that happen?" The women exchanged glances, not of pity, but of determination. Sister Mary's usual gentle face had turned to steel. "We'll stand with you," she said simply. As her shift wound down, Evelyn gathered her documentation, her detailed notes from the night of Grace's admission, the redacted incident reports, timestamps, medication records. She copied everything onto a USB drive, labeled it clearly, and sealed it in an envelope. "What's that for?" Martha asked as Evelyn locked it in her personal locker. "Insurance," Evelyn replied. "In case paperwork starts to disappear." Martha nodded slowly. Smart woman. Evelyn gathered her things, glancing one last time at Grace's room, where Daniel still sat guard, and where a circle of strong women had created a fortress of love around their friend. The truth was safe now, preserved in multiple places, witnessed by many eyes, held in faithful hands. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital windows as Daniel Carter stepped into the quiet hallway, his phone buzzing for the 10th time that hour. He pressed his back against the cool wall, watching nurses pass with their careful, measured steps. "Senator, we need to get ahead of this," his chief of staff urged through the speaker. "One press conference, controlled message, show strength." Daniel rubbed his temple. "Tom, my wife is lying in there with tubes in her arms. This isn't about optics, which is exactly why we need to—" "I'll call you back." Daniel ended the call as Grace's nurse approached with fresh vitals. Back in Grace's room, he found her awake, her eyes clearer than they'd been all morning. She reached for his hand. "I heard you in the hall," she said softly. "They want you to make a statement." Daniel settled into the chair beside her bed. "You don't need that pressure right now. We can handle this, quietly, through proper channels." Grace's fingers tightened around his. "Daniel, I'm not ashamed. What happened in that operating room, the mockery, the cruelty, it wasn't my fault, and I won't hide like it was. Grace, how many others?" Her voice grew stronger. "How many patients without a senator's name to protect them? Someone needs to speak up." Daniel studied his wife's face. The determination beneath the fatigue, the familiar quiet, strength that had first drawn him to her years ago. "Okay," he said, "but we do this smart. Official complaints first, internal review, documentation. We only go public if they try to bury the truth." Evelyn entered with Grace's medication, nodding approval. "I can help with the timeline," she said. Every degrading comment, every time he pushed to minimize pain control, the exact moment he realized who Grace was, and suddenly changed his tune. She pulled out her notebook, its pages dense with precise notes. 2:15 a.m., refused standard pre-op comfort measures. 2:23, made comparison to veterinary care. 2:37, attempted to proceed without anesthesia consultation. As they built their case point by point, Marianne Holt gathered the morning staff 3 floors up. Her heels clicked against tile as she paced the conference room. "Patient privacy is paramount," she emphasized, her smile tight. All inquiries go through proper channels. All documentation follows chain of command. We are a 5-star facility with a reputation for excellence. The staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats as she continued. Any unauthorized discussions or record access will be treated as serious policy violations. We protect our patients and our team. Evelyn, arriving for her shift, caught the end of the speech. She recognized the subtle threat woven through Holt's polished words. Stay quiet, or there will be consequences. Back in Grace's room, the afternoon passed in a cycle of vital checks and brief moments of rest. Church friends brought homemade soup and prayer cards. Veterans' wives arrived with gentle hugs and fierce determination in their eyes. Grace spoke openly about her experience, each word strengthening her resolve. I don't want revenge, she told them. I want change. I want every patient treated with dignity no matter who they are or aren't related to. As evening settled over the hospital, Grace finally drifted into true sleep, her breathing steady and deep. Daniel dozed in the bedside chair while Evelyn finished her shift notes. Her phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line made her stomach clench. Request for meeting, HR fact-finding review. The message was brief, but clear. Her actions in the operating room required immediate discussion. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Evelyn gathered her things with steady hands, though her heart raced. In the elevator, she thought of Grace's courage, of all the patients who couldn't fight back, of the years she'd spent watching good people stay silent out of fear. In her car, under the harsh parking lot lights, she finally allowed herself to feel it all. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. Tears blurred her vision. 1 minute, she told herself, 1 minute to be afraid. She counted the seconds, letting the fear wash through her. Then she took a deep breath, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and sat up straight. They wanted her silence, they wouldn't get it. She thought of her detailed notes, safely copied and secured. She thought of the witnesses who had seen Dr. Pierce's behavior change the moment he learned Grace's identity. She thought of every patient who had ever been dismissed, degraded, or denied proper care. The truth would not disappear this time, not if she had anything to say about it. The morning light filtered through the hospital's HR conference room windows as Evelyn Brooks sat straight-backed in an uncomfortable chair. 3 faces stared at her from across the table. HR Director Janet Mills, Risk Manager Tom Peterson, and a hospital attorney she didn't recognize. We're concerned about some protocol violations during Dr. Pierce's emergency surgery, Janet began, her voice professionally neutral. Particularly your decision to page additional staff without proper authorization. Evelyn kept her hands folded calmly in her lap. I followed standard OR protocol requiring anesthesia oversight for major trauma cases. I have the policy number right here. She pulled a folder from her bag. The attorney cleared his throat. Ms. Brooks, we're more concerned about your unauthorized documentation of private conversations. You mean my nursing notes? Evelyn met his gaze. Recording relevant patient care details is part of my job description. Would you like to see that policy as well? Frustration flickered across Janet's face. Evelyn, you've been with us 15 years. You understand how these things work? Dr. Pierce is a valued member of our surgical team. Yes, he is, Evelyn agreed quietly, which is why proper documentation protects everyone, including Dr. Pierce. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. They pressed her to clarify her notes, to admit she might have misinterpreted things in the stress of the moment. Evelyn stayed calm and kept citing policy numbers. She had nothing to retract. Walking back to her unit, afterward, her colleague Maria caught up with her. They've scheduled the grievance review for tomorrow at 2, she whispered. That's crazy fast. They usually take weeks. Evelyn nodded. They want it done before anyone starts asking questions. In Grace's room, the morning brought different challenges. Physical therapist Kevin helped her sit up slowly, supporting her as waves of dizziness passed. That's it. Nice and easy, he encouraged. Let's get those legs moving. Grace gripped the bed rail, face tight with determination. Standing took 3 attempts, but she made it, trembling and sweating, but upright. Daniel squeezed her hand while Kevin kept a steady hold on her other side. Look at you, Daniel said softly. My strong girl. Grace managed 5 shaky steps before needing to sit. She was breathing hard but smiling. Didn't think... Walking could feel like winning a race. Daniel pulled out his phone while she rested. Want to hear some messages? Martha from church called and the whole veterans support group signed a card. He read them aloud while Grace sipped water through a straw. Friends offering prayers, sharing their own surgery stories, promising casseroles. Normal, loving things that made the hospital feel less cold. A news anchor's voice drifted in from the lobby television. Renowned surgeon, Dr. Randall Pierce, whose quick action saved another life this week. Grace's hand tightened on the cup. Daniel immediately walked over and asked the volunteer to change the channel. When he returned, Grace was staring at her lap. I keep thinking about the other patients, she said quietly. The ones who came before me. The ones who'll come after if nobody speaks up. You don't have to do this right now, Daniel reminded her. You're still healing. That's what scares me. Grace looked up at him. Speaking while I'm weak, but being quiet, that scares me more. Evelyn came in to check vitals, catching the end of their conversation. Whatever you decide, she said, adjusting Grace's IV. I'll be there. Simple truth, told respectfully. That evening, Daniel pulled a chair close to Grace's bed. Want to practice what you might say? Grace nodded. They worked together, finding plain words for hard things. No dramatic accusations, just clear facts about how it felt to be mocked while helpless, to hear laughter instead of comfort. I don't want special treatment, Grace said, her voice stronger with each repetition. I just want every patient to be treated with basic human dignity. When her primary doctor came by for evening rounds, Grace asked directly, when will I be strong enough to sit through a review board meeting? The doctor checked her incision, her vital trends, her lab work. Maybe tomorrow if you continue improving. But only for an hour, with breaks, if needed. Grace squeezed Daniel's hand. Then, I'm ready to speak tomorrow. The truth won't get stronger by waiting. The conference room felt smaller than Grace expected, with its beige walls and a long table that seemed to stretch forever. Her wheelchair barely fit at one end, the blanket Daniel had, tucked around her knees, providing little comfort against the aggressive air conditioning. 8 faces watched her from around the table, board members in pressed suits, their expressions carefully neutral. Marianne Holt sat at the head, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light, hands folded precisely on a leather portfolio. Mrs. Carter, Marianne began, her voice warm but measured, we appreciate you joining us today, especially given your condition. Before we begin, I must stress the confidential nature of these proceedings. Daniel's hand rested on Grace's shoulder. She could feel Evelyn's steady presence behind her, like a wall of quiet strength. Please, Marianne continued, tell us about your experience that night. Grace took a slow breath. The words she'd practiced felt different here, heavier somehow. But she kept her voice steady, just as she used to when counseling troubled students. I woke up in the ER after the crash, she began. Everything hurt. I was scared. And then, her fingers twisted in the blanket. I heard laughter. Not kind laughter, the cruel kind. Dr. Pierce was joking about my pain, saying I belonged at a vet instead of a hospital. She described each moment in simple terms, the mocking comments, the resistance to proper pain medication, the way he treated her dignity like an inconvenience. Her voice caught only once, describing how helpless she felt on the operating table, hearing them discuss what comfort she deserved. The worst part wasn't the pain, Grace said quietly. It was feeling less than human in my most vulnerable moment. One of the board members, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. And this changed after your identity was discovered? Yes. Grace straightened slightly in her chair. Suddenly there was respect, careful language, constant attention. But that's exactly the problem. My husband's title should never be the reason I receive basic human dignity. Every patient deserves that, regardless of who they are or who they know. Evelyn stepped forward then, placing her detailed notes on the table. Her voice was clear and professional as she walked through the timeline. Each protocol she had to enforce, each moment she needed to call in additional oversight to ensure proper care. I've been a nurse for 27 years, she said. I document everything. That night I made sure to record exactly what happened, when it happened, and who was present. Dr. Pierce sat stiffly in his chair, his usual confidence cracking around the edges. When he spoke, his words seemed rehearsed. I want to express my deepest regrets for any misunderstanding, he said. Emergency. Trauma cases are extremely stressful. Sometimes our focus on saving lives can make us seem abrupt. If my manner was interpreted as disrespectful, I sincerely apologize. Dr. Pierce, one board member interrupted. Can you explain why your approach changed so dramatically after learning Mrs. Carter's identity? Pierce's fingers drummed once on the table before he caught himself. That is, for the first time, his polished veneer cracked completely. The situation required different considerations at that point. Different considerations, Grace repeated softly, because suddenly I mattered. The silence that followed felt heavy with truth. Marianne Holt cleared her throat, shuffling papers with practiced efficiency. The board takes these concerns very seriously. We're implementing several immediate changes: a new transparent grievance tracking system, mandatory anti-bias, training for all staff, and enhanced protections for employees who report concerns. She turned to Grace with what seemed like genuine respect. Your courage in speaking up will help ensure better care for all our patients. Back in her hospital room, Grace sank against the pillows, exhaustion hitting her in waves. But something else flowed beneath the tiredness, a sense of being heard, of truth finally reaching the light. Daniel helped adjust, her blankets, his movements gentle. You did it, love. You stood your ground with such grace. She squeezed his hand, feeling tears press against her eyes, not from pain or fear this time, but from relief. They heard me, she whispered. They really heard me. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, warming her face. For the first time since the crash, Grace felt like she could truly breathe. The sunset painted long shadows across Grace's hospital room as Daniel's phone buzzed for the 20th time in an hour. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. It's getting ugly out there, he said softly, not wanting to disturb Grace, who was resting after the emotional strain of the grievance hearing. The story had broken online, but it wasn't the truth. Someone had twisted everything, painting Dr. Pierce as a dedicated surgeon being targeted by political forces. The comments were brutal, questioning Grace's credibility and Daniel's motives. How dare he use his position to attack one of our finest doctors, one comment read. Another politician trying to score points, said another. Daniel's closest aide, Marcus, called again. Senator, we need to get ahead of this. Let me draft a statement. Give me an hour, Daniel said firmly. Just 1 hour of peace first. He ended the call and looked at Grace, who was already watching him with knowing eyes. That bad? She asked. Nothing we can't handle, he assured her, but his phone kept lighting up with notifications. Reverend Collins arrived just then, his quiet presence filling the room with calm. Without fanfare, he pulled up a chair and folded his weathered hands. Shall we pray together? He asked simply. Grace reached for Daniel's hand, and they bowed their heads. The Reverend's steady voice washed over them. Lord, grant us wisdom in this storm. Help us remember that truth doesn't shout, it stands. In the administrative wing, Marianne Holt paced her office, phone pressed to her ear. We need containment, she told the PR team. Draft talking points about our commitment to excellence. Emphasize Dr. Pierce's reputation, and get me numbers on his surgical success rates. She paused at her window, watching reporters gathering near the hospital entrance. The board needs reassurance that this won't affect donor confidence. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat straight-backed in a stark HR conference room. Across the table, Margaret Chen from HR placed a thick policy manual between them like a barrier. Your documentation of Dr. Pierce's comments was unauthorized, Margaret stated, and paging additional oversight without consulting the attending physician was within protocol when patient safety is concerned, Evelyn finished calmly. Section 4, paragraph 3 of those same policies you're holding. The department manager, Steve Kendrick, cleared his throat. Several staff members felt uncomfortable with your questioning after the incident. I imagine they felt more uncomfortable watching a patient being humiliated, Evelyn replied evenly. She kept her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. I followed every protocol. I protected my patient, and I won't name the staff members who confided in me about similar incidents. Margaret's lips thinned. Then you leave us no choice. Administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full investigation of your conduct. Evelyn stood slowly, unclipped her ID badge and placed it on the table. The plastic made a small click against the wood, like a period at the end of a sentence. She took out her phone and sent Daniel a brief text. On leave. Notes are safe. Keep going. The side corridor was quiet as she walked out, her comfortable shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Dr. Pierce passed by, his white coat pristine, his eyes sliding past her as if she were invisible. His stride radiated confidence, the untouchable kind that came from years of protection. But Evelyn's shoulders stayed straight, her chin high. Because she knew something Pierce didn't. Truth didn't need protection. It just needed patience. She pushed through the heavy door into the evening air, leaving behind her badge but carrying something far more valuable, her integrity, and evidence that would eventually break through all the careful walls of silence they'd built around him. The next morning arrived with a grey drizzle against the hospital windows. Grace stirred in her bed, face pinched with discomfort, her hand pressed against her abdomen, and a small whimper escaped her lips. "Daniel," she whispered. "Something's wrong." The monitors above her bed started beeping faster. Daniel rose from his chair, instantly alert. "What is it? What hurts?" "My stomach. It's burning." Sweat beaded on Grace's forehead despite the cool room. 2 nurses rushed in, checking vital signs and frowning at the readings. "Temperature's 102.3, one called out. "Blood pressure's dropping." Daniel watched helplessly as they paged the covering physician. The doctor arrived quickly, ordered blood work and imaging, but his expression was guarded. "We may need to consult with Dr. Pierce, since he performed the original surgery." "No!" Grace's voice cracked with panic. She clutched Daniel's hand. "Please don't let him near me. Please!" Daniel squeezed her fingers. "We're getting you transferred. Right now." He strode to the nurses' station and demanded to speak with Marianne Holt. When the administrator arrived, her smile was practiced but tight. "Senator Carter, I understand your concern, but transfers are complex. We need to locate an available bed, review paperwork, ensure continuity of care." "My wife is sick and terrified," Daniel cut in, keeping his voice low but firm. "Every minute you delay puts her at risk." "We're doing everything by protocol," Holt assured him smoothly. "These things take time." Daniel stepped away and called the patient advocate's office. The woman on the line was sympathetic but careful. "Submit the transfer request in writing," she advised. "Demand complete copies of all records immediately. Document everything." He headed to the records department, asking for the OR documentation from Grace's surgery. The clerk typed at her computer, frowning. "I'm sorry, but those files are currently under review. They're temporarily unavailable." Daniel's stomach clenched. He tried calling Evelyn, needing her steady guidance. She answered on the first ring. "They've locked me out of all hospital systems," she told him. "I can't access anything anymore." As afternoon shadows lengthened across Grace's room, an email arrived from Risk Management. Daniel read it twice, his hands growing cold. "Regarding the incident report referenced in Nurse Brooks's notes, we regret to inform you this document cannot be located at this time." He returned to Grace's bedside, taking her trembling hand in his. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, her breathing shallow with pain and fear. "They're trying to bury it," she whispered, "aren't they?" Daniel watched a tear slip down her cheek. The truth of her words settled like lead in his chest. This wasn't just about the cruel treatment anymore. It was about making sure that treatment vanished without a trace. "I won't let them," he promised, wiping her tear away. But as monitors beeped and Grace shivered with fever, he felt the weight of what they were up against. The hospital wasn't just protecting Pierce anymore. They were erasing the evidence that he needed protection from. Grace squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm scared," she admitted. Daniel sat beside her bed, holding her hand as if he could anchor her through sheer force of will. Through the window, the rain continued its quiet drumming, while inside, piece by piece, the record of that terrible night was disappearing into institutional silence. The fluorescent lights hummed in the hospital corridor as Daniel Carter paced, his phone pressed to his ear. His dress shirt was wrinkled from too many hours in the same clothes. But appearances didn't matter now. What mattered was getting Grace somewhere safe. "Yes, we have a bed available," the administrator from Memorial Hospital said, "but we need the transfer paperwork from your current facility." Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. "I understand. We're waiting on final approval." In Grace's room, monitors beeped steadily. She dozed fitfully, her face pinched with discomfort even in sleep. The fever hadn't broken, and every time she stirred, her eyes would dart fearfully to the door. Marianne Holt's heels clicked purposefully down the hallway. Even at this late hour, she looked perfectly put together, her suit unwrinkled, her smile practiced. "Senator Carter," she said, "I know you're eager to move forward, but these things take time. We need to ensure all proper protocols are followed." "My wife has a fever and needs care she can trust," Daniel said quietly. "Every minute of delay puts her at risk. Dr. Pierce is perfectly qualified. Dr. Pierce will not come near my wife again." Daniel's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Marianne's smile tightened. "I'll check on the paperwork status again." As she walked away, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Parking lot. Important." He kissed Grace's forehead. "Rest, sweetheart. I'll be right back." The night air was cool and damp. Evelyn stood beside her car, looking small but determined in her civilian clothes. Her hands clutched her purse tightly. "Senator Carter," she said, "I need to give you something." She pulled out a USB drive and a thick envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed them over. "This is everything," she said. "My complete statement about that night. Times, quotes, exactly what Dr. Pierce said and did. The protocols he tried to skip. How he changed when he learned who Grace was." She took a shaky breath. "I made copies before they locked me out of the system." Daniel carefully tucked the items into his jacket pocket. "Evelyn, this is incredibly brave." "I'm scared," she admitted. 20 years at this hospital. They can blacklist me, but—" She straightened her shoulders. "I keep seeing Grace's face when he was mocking her. I hear his laugh when she was crying in pain. I can't sleep knowing it could happen again to someone else." "I'll connect you with legal counsel," Daniel said. "And there's a whistleblower hotline through the medical board. First thing tomorrow morning, file a formal report." Evelyn nodded. "I will. Just please make sure this doesn't get buried. Make sure someone hears her story." Back upstairs, Daniel found Reverend Collins sitting quietly beside Grace's bed, his worn Bible open in his lap. The chaplain's presence brought a sense of peace to the sterile room. "We were just praying," Grace whispered, her voice thin but steady. "Not for vengeance, for strength to speak truth." "Amen to that," Reverend Collins said softly. He squeezed Grace's hand. "God sees you, dear one, even in the dark." Daniel sat down and drafted one final email to hospital administration. He attached copies of all previous transfer requests, cited patient rights regulations, and stated firmly that any further delay would be reported as patient endangerment. The response came just before dawn. Transfer approved. Morning light was just beginning to soften the darkness when the transport team arrived. They were gentle as they helped Grace onto the gurney, mindful of her IV lines and the fresh surgical dressing. Grace reached for Daniel's hand as they wheeled her toward the elevator. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. "Don't let them erase me," she whispered. Daniel bent close, his voice fierce with love and promise. "Never." The ambulance waited in the circular drive, red lights painting the walls in silent pulses. As they loaded Grace carefully inside, Daniel saw Marianne Holt watching from a window above, her expression unreadable in the grey dawn. He climbed in beside his wife, and the doors closed with a final click. Grace's eyes fluttered closed as exhaustion overtook her. Daniel held her hand as the ambulance pulled away, leaving behind the building where healing had turned to harm, but also where truth had found its voice. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavy with promise. Whatever came next, the facts were preserved. Grace's story would be heard. The ambulance pulled up to Memorial West Hospital under a cloudy midday sky. Unlike the frantic arrival 3 days ago, this time Grace was awake, aware, and watching everything through tired eyes. Her fever still burned, but Daniel's steady presence beside the gurney gave her strength. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen," a woman in blue scrubs said warmly, meeting them at the entrance. "We're going to take good care of you. Is it okay if I check your abdomen?" Grace nodded, tears pricking her eyes at such a simple thing, being asked permission before being touched. "I'm going to press gently." "Here," Dr. Chen explained, her hands careful and professional. "Let me know if anything hurts." In the exam room, nurses introduced themselves by name. They explained each medication, each blood draw, each vital check. When Grace winced during a movement, they paused and waited. Such basic dignity shouldn't feel revolutionary, But after the nightmare at the first hospital, it was like cool water in a desert. Daniel watched it all, his jaw tight. This was how it should have been from the start. This was what every patient deserved. Dr. Chen studied the new scans carefully. "You have a small infection at the surgical site," she explained, pulling up the images. "It's causing the fever and pain, but we can treat it effectively with targeted antibiotics. We'll start those right away." Grace squeezed Daniel's hand. "Thank you for getting me out of there." By early afternoon, Grace was settled in a sunny room with antibiotics flowing and her pain finally properly managed. Daniel stepped out briefly to meet Keith Morrison, the state medical board investigator assigned to their complaint. They sat in a small conference room where Daniel handed over a USB drive and a thick folder of documents. "This contains Nurse Brooks' complete statement and documentation from the night of admission," Daniel explained, including timestamps of Dr. Pierce's comments and attempts to minimize care before he knew who Grace was. The investigator nodded, taking careful notes. "And the hospital's response when you requested records. Delays. Missing documents. Suddenly unavailable incident reports." Daniel's voice stayed measured but firm. "They put Nurse Brooks on administrative leave when she refused to retract her documentation." "Classic intimidation tactics," Morrison said quietly. "We've seen this before." Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Whistleblower report filed. Medical board complaint submitted with all documentation. Confirmation numbers attached." He showed the message to Morrison, who wrote down the reference numbers. "This helps establish the timeline. We'll need to move quickly before more records mysteriously disappear." A soft knock at the door revealed Reverend Collins, who had driven over from the first hospital. The chaplain's kind face was a welcome sight. "Grace asked if we could pray together," he said simply. They gathered around Grace's bed, Daniel, the Reverend, and even a nurse who asked to join them. Grace's voice was tired but clear. "Lord, we don't ask for revenge. We ask for the strength to speak truth. We ask for the courage to protect others who might face the same cruelty. And we ask for wisdom to seek justice with clean hearts." "Amen," they whispered together. The afternoon light was fading when Daniel's phone rang. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Senator Carter?" The voice was young, hesitant. "I'm Dr. James Martinez. I was the resident on call that night in the OR with Dr. Pierce." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. "Yes? I've been struggling with what I saw, what I heard, the way he treated your wife." A shaky breath. "I was afraid to speak up because I'm still in training. But I can't stay quiet anymore. I have notes from that night. I documented everything." "Are you willing to make a formal statement?" Daniel asked gently. "Yes," the resident replied. "It's time someone told the truth about what happens behind those doors." Daniel thanked him and wrote down his contact information. When he returned to Grace's room, she was resting peacefully for the first time in days. The new antibiotics were working. The staff treated her with respect. She was safe. He sat beside her bed, thinking about the resident's call. The wall of silence at the first hospital was starting to crack. One voice of truth was becoming many. Perhaps that's how justice usually began, not with thunderous declarations, but with quiet people finding the courage to say, "I saw what happened, and I won't pretend I didn't." The evening settled around them. Softly, Grace stirred and smiled at him, no longer afraid. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with dignity and determination. The truth would not stay buried. A bright morning sun streamed through the windows of Grace's new hospital room, casting warm light across her bed. She gripped the walker handles, her steps careful but determined, as she made her way down the hallway with Sarah, her physical therapist. "You're doing great, Mrs. Carter," Sarah encouraged, staying close but letting Grace set her own pace. "Just a few more steps." The difference in care was like night and day. Here, every nurse introduced themselves with a smile. They explained medications before administering them. They asked about her comfort level regularly, simple human dignity, exactly what had been missing before. In a conference room down the hall, Daniel spread documents across the table, working with State Investigator Monica Chen. His sleeves were rolled up, his normally perfect tie slightly loosened after hours of detailed review. "So, after Dr. Pierce realized my wife was a senator's spouse," Daniel explained, pointing to Evelyn's meticulous timeline, his entire demeanor changed. The cruel jokes stopped. He became almost frantically polite. Monica nodded, making careful notes. And you have multiple witnesses who can verify this behavioral shift? Yes. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Sarah Patel, was present for both interactions, and there's a surgical tech, James Morton, who heard the initial mocking comments. Over the next 6 days, a steady stream of hospital staff met with investigator Chen. Dr. Patel described how she'd insisted on proper anesthesia protocols after hearing Pierce suggest minimal sedation would be fine. James Morton recounted Pierce's shocking animal comparison and dismissive laughter, while Grace lay injured. The young resident, Dr. Amy Torres, spoke in a quiet but firm voice about watching Pierce's transformation. It was like a switch flipped when he saw the senator's name, she testified. Suddenly he was all concerned about comfort measures he'd dismissed minutes before. Evelyn sat tall during her interview, her documentation spread before her. Years of nursing had taught her to track everything, and now those careful notes formed an undeniable record. When she received the formal notice protecting whistleblowers from retaliation, she felt tension leave her shoulders for the first time in days. The formal meeting was scheduled in a large conference room at the original hospital. Grace appeared on a secure video link, looking stronger, but still bearing the physical and emotional marks of her ordeal. Her voice remained steady as she described that terrible night. I was already frightened from the crash, she said, but what hurt most was being mocked while I was helpless. No human being should be treated that way. Dr. Pierce sat stiffly in his chair, his usual confidence cracking under the weight of consistent witness statements and time-stamped documentation. When confronted with specific quotes and actions, his rehearsed defenses began to crumble. I may have made some inappropriate comments, he finally admitted, staring at his hands. And yes, I became more attentive after learning about Mrs. Carter's connection. So you acknowledge providing different levels of care based on a patient's perceived status? Investigator Chen pressed. Pierce's shoulders sagged. Yes, the hospital board members exchanged grim looks. Marianne Holt's polished facade showed cracks of genuine dismay. Within hours, they drafted an emergency order, placing Pierce on immediate administrative leave pending full review. Daniel stood by the window after the meeting, watching Pierce walk to his car, badge surrendered. The doctor's normally confident stride was gone, replaced by the heavy steps of someone facing real consequences for the first time. In her new hospital room, Grace sat with Reverend Collins, who had become a steady presence of comfort. Truth came to light, the chaplain said softly. Grace nodded. Not for vengeance, for change. She thought of all the patients who would never know they'd been protected by a nurse's careful notes and witnesses' courage to speak up. Sometimes, justice worked quietly, one documented fact at a time. The preliminary findings arrived in a thick envelope. Evidence supports allegations of misconduct, discriminatory care, and attempts to minimize appropriate medical interventions. The formal language couldn't capture the human impact, but it carried the weight of accountability. Monica Chen gathered her files, pausing at Grace's door before leaving. Your story will help change policies, she said. Thank you for your courage. Grace managed a small smile. Thank Evelyn. She made sure the truth couldn't disappear. That evening, Daniel sat beside Grace's bed, holding her hand as she dozed, peacefully. The monitors beeped steadily, but now those sounds meant healing instead of fear. Outside, the sun was setting on a system that had protected cruelty, until documentation and dignity proved stronger than silence. 3 weeks after the investigation's findings shook the hospital, Grace sat in her favorite armchair by the living room window, morning light warming her hands as she worked through her physical therapy exercises. The incision site still ached, but each day brought more strength. She flexed her feet and rotated her ankles, following the printed instructions her therapist had left. Small victories, she whispered to herself, remembering how even sitting up had once seemed impossible. Daniel came in with 2 cups of tea, setting them carefully on the side table. The hospital board just voted, he said softly. Dr. Pierce's privileges are officially revoked, pending final medical board action. Grace nodded, taking a slow breath. How many others came forward? 7 former patients, plus 3 more staff members. Daniel sat beside her. The new complaint tracking system goes live next week. Every report gets logged, nothing disappears. Grace's church friends had been taking turns bringing meals, filling their refrigerator with casseroles and comfort food. Today's container came with a card that read, "Your voice matters. You made others safer." Twice a week, her physical therapist visited, helping her regain strength and confidence. Between sessions, Grace worked through her emotions with as much dedication as her exercises. Some mornings, the memory of that cruel night in the ER would hit hard, but she refused to let fear win. "Evelyn called," Daniel said, checking his phone. "The hospital's making it official tomorrow. Full reinstatement, back pay, and a public commendation for outstanding commitment to patient safety protocol." Grace smiled. Her co-workers, coming around strong now. Several thanked her personally for being brave enough to speak up. It's changing the culture there, bit by bit. Daniel had been working late nights, crafting legislation with his team. They'd consulted nurses, veterans advocates, and patient rights groups to design a comprehensive dignity and whistleblower protection measure. "We're calling it the Patient Voice Act," he explained. "Clear reporting channels, protected documentation requirements, anti-retaliation enforcement with real teeth. No one should need political connections to be heard and believed." Grace reached for her tea, her movements careful but steady. "Has there been any word from Dr. Pierce? His lawyer contacted us. He wants to meet with a mediator. Present." Grace shook her head. "I can't sit across from him yet, but I'll accept a written apology if it's real. No excuses, no deflecting. He needs to name what he did and why it was wrong." Daniel squeezed her hand. "That's more grace than he deserves." "It's not about what he deserves," Grace said quietly. "Forgiveness is between me and God. But accountability? That needs to be public. That needs to protect others." Later that week, Grace attended a community health fair hosted in her church's fellowship hall. The space buzzed with activity, nurses offering free blood pressure checks, seniors chatting over coffee and pastries, young families picking up resource packets about patient advocacy. Evelyn had helped organize a booth about knowing your rights as a patient. She stood tall in her crisp uniform, her badge restored, sharing information with quiet authority. When she saw Grace, her smile was warm and steady. "Look at all these people," Evelyn said, gesturing to the crowd. "They know they matter now. They know someone will listen." Grace moved carefully through the room, greeting familiar faces and new ones alike. Her church friends had set up a hospitality station, making sure everyone felt welcome. Veterans' spouses staffed a table about healthcare navigation and support services. The pain of that terrible night hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into something powerful, a force for change, a shield for others who might have faced the same cruelty in silence. Grace watched elderly neighbors laughing together, saw young mothers asking questions without fear, and felt the strength of community filling every corner. "Mrs. Carter?" A young nurse approached her, voice gentle. "I just wanted to say what you did, speaking up. It made a difference. We're all safer now." Grace smiled, her heart full. "Then it was worth every hard moment," she said, and meant it completely. Daniel worked the room quietly, stacking chairs, refilling coffee urns, letting Grace have her moment. He watched his wife greeting people with that steady smile that said more than words. "You are seen. You matter. You are not alone." The morning light streamed through the church windows, warming the busy space. In every conversation, every handshake, every shared story, Grace saw the same truth. Survival could become purpose and pain could be transformed into protection for others.